just one time in this show, I really want what should be an easy thing, like super glue, to not be the stupid hard thing. Anyway, today though, we're taking a little bit of old school, mixing it with some new school when it comes to building tabletop buildings for Warhammer 40,000. When I was first getting into Warhammer 40,000, I was really cheap and built a lot of terrain out of foam core board, and frankly, it really sucked. Now, on the opposite end of that, you could head over to games-workshop.com, which is apparently now warhammer.com, and discover that they no longer sell those really fancy building kits they used to have back in the day. Probably because they were really expensive, cost well over $100 in some cases, and nobody bought them. Because everybody was making terrain out of foam core board, even though it really sucked. Now, of course, today with 3D printers, we've got an interesting set of solutions when it comes to printing Warhammer 40,000 terrain, but the reality is a lot of those prints take a long time. There's support material involved, which makes things even more messy, and frankly, in a lot of cases, when you find some random STL online, it never looks like it does in the 3D renders because, to be honest with you, a lot of designers don't really properly test or do any sort of testing at all in terms of 3D printing their actual 3D models. It's a real problem out there. So what I want to explore today is try to see if there's a happy medium between cheap, old school terrain building with foam core board, which I got a sheet sitting over here so I keep pointing at, as well as 3D printing. So in a moment here, I'm going to jump in the Blender and start designing some basic 3D design, detail elements for the buildings. Now, if you're new to Blender, this type of construction is actually a really good way to get started because you can get a lot in terms of small bits of details with only a little bit of 3D modeling skill. So let's take a look at some of the basic ideas of how you do that right about now. Oh, and I should add before I go off in this direction, if you don't want to learn Blender and 3D modeling, you can always go ahead and find some really cool looking 3D bits on various STL websites and all that fun stuff, and use those in place of the custom design bits I'm working with here. So first up is a floor. This is going to be also for the base of the building as well as any additional floors to the building itself. And all I'm really doing here is taking a cube, squishing it down, adding some bevel corners to it, or bevel edges for the top, make it look a little bit nicer. And then I'm applying an array modifier twice to turn it into a grid. And once I've got that entire grid spaced out to where it's pretty close to the maximum size of my 3D printer bed, I can go ahead and cut this piece down later on. I'm then going to add one final cube that's going to encompass the entire area and just kind of give a base for all these little floor tiles to sit on. And after several hours of printing, you get something that looks kind of like this, except hopefully yours is not screwed up. I had basically with my printer, I had not done proper bed leveling in like 7 years. Okay, I think maybe I had my Ultimaker 3 for like 5 years or something. I've never done I haven't done proper bed leveling since I got the printer. So there's some issues here and I got a bunch of layer shifts. But at the end of the day, I don't really care in this case because this is going to be a ruined building. So a jacked up 3D print a little bit is not that big of a deal in this case. So let's move on and doing something kind of similar for some wall details. I'm starting off with just some generic decorations for the walls, and the ideas are kind of like some sci-fi looking wall supports, nothing too fancy. I'm just taking a cube, turning it into a trapezoid, stretching out really far, creating another trapezoid looking cube, and then I'm using a Boolean operation, which is a mathematical thing for joining two different objects together, or in this case, I'm taking 4 little objects and I'm subtracting them from one of my trapezoid to get just some little cutouts in the final piece. And then after I do that, I'm going back to the array modifier, which allows you to multiply an object multiple times, as we just used a little bit ago in the floor. And I'm kind of adding these fancier detail bits up along the length of this entire wall piece. Now I'm making these about 6 inches, and I'm going to end up printing off, I don't know how many of these I print off, like 8 or so of these things right here. And I'm going to glue these to the side of the wall to add some interesting detail. Then I'm going to jump over to work on some windows as well as some doors. And in both cases, all I'm really doing is taking this thing that I created for the wall details, kind of chopping it up a little bit, creating a whole bunch of nightmares of non-manifold vertices. That took a few hours to resolve. And then I'm kind of arranging them differently to form a door, which I measured to be about 40 millimeters tall. So that way even some of the larger miniatures, like this old school ethereal, can stand in the doorway. And then for the window, something kind of similar, but I'm arranging it all four sides to kind of, make it a window, whereas the door frame has the bottom open because, people walk through doors. Then I've got two more things that I want to 3D model up really quickly. The first is going to be bricks. Now this is basically done the exact same way that I made the floor, except that instead of square tiles, I'm using rectangle tiles, and I'm offsetting each of the rows so that they look like they're lined up more like bricks. Now the idea here is that I'm going to remove the top layer and maybe some of the foam of the foam core board and stick these inset a little bit into the walls that kind of look like whatever was covering the outside of the walls, whether it's paint, plaster, something kind of like that, have broken away. And you can now see the real structure inside. And back on the topic of the floors, the other thing that I forgot to do and talk about is I designed several little support pieces like this. They're just little 90-degree things that are going to glue onto the foam core board that'll help support the floors for the second and third levels of them. And then finally, because Warhammer 40,000 is an apocalyptic hellscape, I've got some little pieces here. These are some pipe designs. We have some pipes that kind of go down into the ground. And then on the other side, you've got some little pipes that go who knows where. I modeled these up a while ago, and I'm pretty sure I have a tutorial on how I actually designed these. If you want a little bit more in-depth detail of tutorial for Blender for Terrain, I'm going to integrate these things in my building because, I don't know, whatever this building was, it was just a toxic mess now. So, yeah, pipes equal toxic mess. Okay, let's get to the actual construction of the building. So I'm going to start by laying out the basic wall structure of my building, which is going to be a little corner section like you used to see in the old days of Games Workshop Cities of Death layouts. And in case anyone is curious, I am using foam core board that has adhesive on the back. That is simply because I forgot to buy normal foam core board at the store, and I've had this in my basement for like years. Let's cut out all this on the inside. Boy, this blade blows. Do I have better blades than this one? Let's go find out. Alright, I cheated. I went downstairs using my bandsaw to cut out the battle damage. It's just much easier that way. Now I'm going to go ahead and make a cut that kind of goes down the middle here to let me fold this piece into more of a corner terrain. For securing this wall into a corner piece, you can try and run glue down here in this crease that we cut, but certain types of glue like super glue are not going to work because that'll melt the foam inside. Hot glue will work, but that's a whole nother tool that I don't have sitting here right now. What I'm going to do instead is use the floors and the fact they have these 90-degree corners here to have them anchor this piece together. Well, that already failed, so by that measure, we're already a failure. Shall we try this again, and maybe we'll have success with attempt number 2? Because that doesn't want to set over there no matter what I do. There we go with the magic of human spit. No, I'm dead serious. Something about spit seems to activate this type of super glue. I think. Or I'm crazy. Chemists know a better idea than I. Like, it just doesn't stick to anything. Well, there we go. That's the idea that I'm going for there. Get a little tired of fighting super glue. All in all, I think as a concept, this worked really well. Clearly with all the 3D printed parts on here, it does look a lot better than a standard foam core only building. However, I didn't factor in that my super glue would really suck and blow and make this really difficult. Hey. So, anyway, that's not the problem with the concept, that's a problem with the tools. I don't know why this bottle of super glue is just so terrible, but it is. So anyway, hope you found this idea a little bit interesting. I think it would work pretty well if you would like to go down that route. Just Gorilla Glue, super glue gel, failed me this time. That is about all I got to say. Anyway, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. Thank you guys all for watching. I got some more ideas on how we can expand on 3D printing and 40K buildings and stuff like that and make things even cooler. So we'll be revisiting this topic some point in the future, hopefully with a good bottle of super glue. So anyway, thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you next time.